over the ruins of Europe. Church chimes rang, rifles let go into discuss, and pennants broadcasted a day of freedom. For millions, it was a conclusion of a long time of add up to war. But for a certain bunch of youthful ladies standing within the shadows of German railroad yards, this day implied something exceptionally distinctive. Their regalia were threadbare leftovers of the Wehrmacht assistants, the Hallerinen, their boots split, their hair unwashed after weeks of withdrawal. A few were scarcely 20, their faces still holding the leftovers of youth underneath layers of sediment and weariness. They were secretaries, typists, radio administrators, medical attendants, cogs in a military machine that had devoured their nation and after that collapsed in their hand. Presently, with the Reich broken, they were grouped into trains not for homecoming, but for imprisonment. The picture was bizarre. Lines of ladies in gray-green skirts and coats, dragging battered bags, venturing into the dim wooden box cars that had once nourished troops to the front. A few clutched rosaries, others proportioned tins, a few nothing at all. A young lady from Hamburg whispered to her companion, "The Americans will not save us. They will make cases." She had listened from a Luftwaffe officer amid the chaos of yield. Another taller, solidified by a long time of keeping an eye on anti-aircraft looklights, said nothing, but her jaw was set as in case bracing for a blow. They had been told once more and once more that the partners, particularly the Americans, were not men, but wolves, that confinement with cruel debasement, brutality, maybe more awful. The trains thundered westbound through a scene of ruins. Charred towns floated past like apparitions. Churches without steeples, bridges collapsed into waterways, skeletal production lines where smoke still smoldered. Children waved from dikes, their faces lean as paper. At night, when the repairs ceased, the ladies crouched against one another for warmth, tuning in to the guard's boots' exterior and the incidental break of gunfire within the separate. One lady, Anna, a previous secretary from Munich, composed in a little journal she had overseen to keep, "We are being taken distant. None knows where. My mother will think I am dead. Perhaps I will be." The travel finished not in a German camp, but within the chaos of involved ports, Bremen, Le Havre, Cherbourg, where ships held up beneath American banners. The ladies were walked the paths, past officers who observed them with expressions they might not studied. A few looked inquisitive, others uninterested. The ladies had anticipated growls, insuperable blows. Instep, there was a range, printed material, lines. They were numbered, labeled, separated into bunch. It felt more like an unusual bureaucracy than retribution. Still, as the ship's motors developed to life, and the coastline of Europe shrank, fear settled into their bones. The Atlantic extended wide and unending, and America, puzzling, far off, a rive of myth and adversary caricature, held up on the other side. On board, nausea grasped numerous. The bunks were stacked in steel holds, the disgust thick with salt and diesel. Nourishment was issued on plate, pale bread, pea-soft meat, steaming mugs of coffee. The ladies gazed in incredulity. For a long time they had eaten cabbage stalks, ersatz bread made of sawdust and grain, watery soup scooped from rusted cans. A few delayed to eat, suspecting harm. Others eaten up it, tears rolling down their faces at the taste of genuine bread. "They bolster us like they bolster themselves," whispered one, flabbergasted. It was not benevolence they anticipated. It was discipline. However, here was a diverse reality, and it unsettled them more than remorselessness might have. When finally the ships come to American shores, modern York, Boston, modern Orleans, the ladies assembled on deck, clutching the rails, looking at horizons rising untouched by bombs. The statue of freedom lingered, an incongruity that drew no grins. Swarms lined the piers, a few scoffing, a few only observing. The ladies were walked to ground under guard, their boots resounding on wooden board. The disgust noticed diverse, cleaner, more liberated, salted by the sea, but untainted by the cinder war. For the primary time, a few realized how totally their world had collapsed. Germany was rubble. America was intaglio, affluent, lively. Buses and trains carried them inland to camps built over the joined-together states. Post Oglethorpe in Georgia, Camp Ruston in Louisiana, and handfuls more. The streets spread out sometime recently them, flanked by green areas and towns where children rode bikes and houses sparkle with white yards. To ladies who had observed their possessed cities burn beneath united bombs, the locate was nearly boundless. They whispered among themselves. Was this genuinely the arrival of the beasts? Seemed this plenitude be genuine? The Reich had guaranteed triumph and conveyed ruins. The foe they had been instructed to despise appeared to live in another universe through and through. At the entryways of the camps, their names were recorded, belonging catalogued, regalia traded for plain work closed. But sometime recently they might settle. There was one more step. The guards, firm but not brutal, coordinated them toward a building. Interior, steam murmured and water dribbled. It was a delousing station, in spite of the fact that the ladies did not, however, know. Their hearts beat. This might be mortification, debasement, the cruelty they had been warned about. Within the long line, whispers circled. This can be where they will make us endure. One clutched her bag as in case it were a shield. Another crossed herself quietly. The line moved gradually, and as each lady entered the tiled room, her desires collided with reality. They were given bars of cleanser, genuine cleanser, thick, white, overwhelming within the hand, noticing faintly of blossoms. Towels taken after, at that point clean pieces of clothing. The showers discharged streams of hot water, washing absent months of grime. A few ladies sobbed straightforwardly, the sound reverberating off the tiles. Others chuckled anxiously, incapable to accept it. For the primary time in a long time, they felt clean, their hair free of lice, their skin liberated of earth. It was not mortification, but reclamation, and it shook them to the center. Anna composed once more in her journal that night, her penmanship trembling over the page. We were told we would be beaten, taunted, broken. Instep, we were given cleanser. How can this be? She did not, however, know that this minute, the straightforward act of washing, would stay carved in memory longer than the war itself. The ladies lay in bunks that night, hair still soggy from the showers, wrapped in covers that noticed faintly of starch and cotton. Exterior the American night murmured with crickets, distant from the thunder of weapons. They whispered to one another, their voices moved but pressing, as on the off chance that sharing a mystery as well delicate to be talked out loud. Maybe the foe was not what they had been told. Maybe there was something here that not one or the other publicity nor fear might explain. What anticipated them within the days to come. Nourishment, work, experiences with Americans would flabbergast them indeed encourage. For presently, in spite of the fact that one picture waited in each intellect, the cleanse in their hands, dangerous, fragrant, irrationally tender. It was as it were the beginning of their confinement. However, it as of now felt just like the starting of something else. And as first light broke over the camp, a address settled among them like morning fog. In the event that the adversary may appear such startling humankind, what other shocks lay ahead? The buses rolled through entryways delegated with spiked wire, their motors protesting as clean rose in pale clouds over the camp street. To the ladies' interior, the locate was at once startling and abnormally deliberate. Protect towers stood at interims. Troopers relaxed with rifles thrown casually, and lines of sleeping enclosure extended flawlessly over the areas. This was not the gray brutality of a concentration camp. This was something bewilderingly distinctive. The wooden buildings were painted, the ways cleared, the wall intaglio but not threatening. The detainees looked at one another, sharing quiet looks that inquired the same address. What world had we ventured into? When they were recorded off the transport, each lady was given a numbered tag. American officers moved with clip proficiency, jotting notes, stamping archives. The ladies hardened, bracing for insuperable or unforgiving orders. However, the watches talked with calmness, their English tones mellowed by Southern draws or Midwestern levelness. For numerous, the primary stun came not from brutality, but from lack of interest. The Americans treated them not as beasts, nor as visitors, but as something abnormally standard, detainees of war to be overseen, catalogued, and housed. The delousing station had as of now unsettled them with its startling civility, but what taken after was stranger still. After the showers, they were driven into a mess hall. The long room noticed of coffee, new bread, and something searing in oil. The ladies solidified within the entryway, confused by the scent alone. Tables extended over the lobby, loaded with plate of nourishment, bubbled potatoes, carrots, beef stew, delicate rolls shining with butter. Steam hazed the windows. The smell was thick and overpowering. An attack of plenitude. One of the watches motioned them forward. Reluctantly, they ventured to the counter. A cook in a white smock dropped spoonfuls of stew onto tin plates, slid cuts of bread over, filled mugs with coffee. The ladies acknowledged the plate, as in spite of the fact that taking care of unstable. A few might not meet the cook's eye. Others gazed at the nourishment, uncertain on the off chance that it was genuine. In Germany, the ultimate winter of war had diminished dinners to dark bread made with sawdust, watery turnip soup, maybe a scrap of horse meat, in the event that one was fortunate. Presently within the enemy's camp, they were given more in one dinner than they had seen in week. Anna, journal tucked securely beneath her sleeping pad, sat with her plate at the long table. She plunged her spoon into the stew, observing the oil coast on beat, the chunks of meat glistening. Probably she tasted it. Her eyes extended, and she squeezed a hand to her mouth as in spite of the fact that embarrassed. Around her, other ladies wavered, at that point ate in hush, broken as it were by the rub of cutlery. For a few, tears slid down their cheeks. One whispered, "My brothers starve within the snow, and here they nourish us like this." It was not benevolence they had been guaranteed by their claimed pioneers, but mortification. And however, the mortification never came. There were no insults, no scoffing. The watches paced gradually up and down, looking at them with proficient separation. One youthful trooper, barely more seasoned than the ladies themselves, indeed gave a slanted grin as he passed, as in the event that to console them. The detainees were ill-equipped for such inconsistencies. They had steeled themselves for remorselessness, but this quiet civility was by one means or another more exasperating. Within the days that taken after, life within the camp uncovered a stun. Each morning they were woken by a chime, issued breakfast, and doled out light obligations. A few worked in kitchens, others in areas nearby, some inneries where American regalia were scoured and squeezed. They were paid little compensation, in camp script, money that might be utilized to purchase things at the canteen. There on wooden racks lay chocolates, cigarettes, pencils, indeed lipstick. The ladies stood before these products as in spite of the fact that at an holy place. A bar of chocolate was a wonder, a tube of lipstick unbelievable. And however here the foe advertised it in trade for work. The incongruity was nearly brutal. Back in Germany, their families rummaged for scrap. Cities lay in ashes. Children picked through rubble for hull. Letters streamed in from domestic, in the event that they arrived at all, filled with lose hope. One lady studied out loud by candlelight. "We live within the cellar presently, the house overcrushed. We bubble weeds for soup. On the off chance that you got anything, send it." She collapsed the paper with trembling fingers, knowing she might not send nourishment back, as it were words. The inlet between their enduring country and the interesting wealth of the camp broadened with each passing day. A few started to feel disgrace heavier than chains. They were foes. However, here they were encouraged, clothed, protected. The Reich had requested their dependability, sent them to man radios and spotlights, but gave them starvation and ruins in return. America, the sworn foe, gave them cleanser and stew. This reversal noted at their souls, implicit but ever show. At night they lay wakeful, tuning into the crickets exterior of the sleeping enclosure and pondering what it implied. Not all balanced effortlessly. A couple stood up to, denying to eat, storing bread coverings beneath pads. Persuaded the liberality was a trick. Rumors spread that the nourishment may well be sedated, that the cleanser contained a few covered-up harm. However, day after day, nothing happened but the calm schedule of camp life. The body stuffed, the skin cleared, the lice vanished. Gradually, doubt yielded to hesitant acknowledgement. The Americans, as well, observed with interest. Numerous watches had never seen German ladies some time recently, as it were caricatures in publicity. They were shocked to discover them lean, depleted, regularly startled. A few were scarcely more seasoned than their sisters back domestic. One protect composed in a letter, They are not what we were told. They are young ladies, and they see at us as in case holding up for a blow that never comes. And so the struggle extended, not one of weapons and trenches, but of recognition. The ladies were constrained to accommodate the adversary they had envisioned with the reality sometime recently them. Each chomp of bread, each bar cleanser, each unbiased word from Protect broken the picture they had been instructed to accept. The war had finished, but in their minds another fight started. A fight between memory and reality, purposeful publicity and truth. Anna captured it in her journal with excruciating clarity. To be treated with nobility by those we were told were mammoths. It is harder than hatred. Contempt is simple. Respect is terrible. Her words talk for numerous. The ladies not dreaded being broken by remorselessness. They dreaded being fixed by thoughtfulness. One evening after work within the areas, the ladies were walked back to camp as the sun plunged moo, spilling gold over the skyline. The sky was endless, unmarred by smoke, and the disgust noticed of cut grass. It was a straightforward scene, however it weighed on them more than the ruins of their country. Here was a arrive untouched, inexhaustible, alive. The Reich had collapsed into rubble. America stood and blistered. And in that realization, a modern unease took root. They had survived the primary stun, the cleanser, the showers, the nourishment. But something else was unfolding, something more troublesome to stand up to. For within the days ahead, it would not be physical survival that challenged them, but the moderate, unsettling acknowledgement that the adversary may be distant more human, and distant more capable than they had ever envisioned. The week settled into a beat, and in that cadence, the ladies started to lose track of time. Morning chime, breakfast line, work detail, dinner, lights out. However, underneath the surface of schedule, a bizarre change blended. At the begin with, they had checked days like detainees scratching counts into stone, but slowly the sharp edge of confinement dulled, supplanted by a calm bewilderment. They were captives, yes, but they were too nourished, clothed, indeed paid for ladies' raise and collapsing Reich, where dependability was remunerated with starvation. This reversal noted at their considerations more tirelessly than any thorned wire fence. Anna, who had once sat in a Munich office typing orders she never addressed, presently worked within the camp clothing. The fragrance of starch and cleanser clung to her fingers as she cleaned American regalia smooth. Each shirt bore the initials of men who were her sworn adversaries, and however, as she collapsed them flawlessly into heaps, she felt less scorn than an odd, blameworthy alleviation. Here was work that did not include war, work that kept her lively. Some of the time she caught her claim reflection within the clean steel of the washing drums, and pondered who she was getting to be. Others were sent into the areas beneath watch, gathering crops that encouraged both detainees and troopers. They felt the sun on their backs, the earth beneath their nails, and the startling weight of full wicker container. A few even laughed delicately at their claimed sweat, finding within the labor an update of the towns they had cleared out behind. Within the nights they returned to the camp, their muscles throbbing, their spirits oddly lighter. This was not the degradation they had arranged themselves for. This was something else totally. The camp canteen before long got to be the foremost dazing corner of their new world. With their compensation, little slips of camp script, they may purchase chocolate bars, cigarettes, indeed jugs a stick. The primary time Anna bit into a Hershey bar, the sweetness exploded on her tongue like nothing she had tasted since childhood. Tears prickled her eyes, and she turned absent from the others, embarrassed at her possessed bliss. A young lady from Bremen spread lipstick on her lips, gazing at herself in a little mirror with doubt. "I feel human once more," she mumbled as in spite of the fact that confessing a sin. But the plenitude carried its claimed torment. Letters from domestic kept on arrive, carried through censors, their words carved in edginess. Families composed of bombarded outlofts, of children hacking in vendors, of bread lines stretching into the cold. One lady examined out loud her mother's supplication. In the event that, as it were, we had your American bread, your brother stars around her. Hush felt overwhelming, broken, as it were, by the scratching of rats underneath the sleeping enclosure floorboards. The ladies sat clutching their letters, their plate of nourishment untouched, the disgrace of bounty burning in their throat. The Americans taken note the inconsistency as well. A few watches were shocked to see the German ladies picking up weight in confinement, cheeks filling, hair recapturing its sparkle. They're superior bolster than people back domestic in a few towns, one warrior mumbled, half in hatred, half in ponder. However, rules were rules. Beneath the Geneva tradition, detainees were to be treated agreeing to benchmarks that frequently surpassed those of war-torn Europe. The incongruity was not misplaced on anybody. Still, doubt never completely vanished. At night, whispers crawled through the bunks. What in case this was all exterior? What in the event that tomorrow the veils fell absent and brutality started? A modest bunch clung to their doubt, storing coverings of bread beneath sleeping pads, persuaded the plenitude was a trap. However, as weeks turned into months, indeed the foremost cautious were worn down by the persistent typicality of American arrange. No beatings came, no disciplines past the gloomy dullness of work. The most prominent brutality, it appeared, was to be treated modestly. Anna's journal recorded the strife with agonizing clarity. I eat, and my stomach much oblige me. I rest, and my body develops solid. However, each benevolence cuts me more profound. How do I accommodate this with the faces of children in Munich who drink water for dinner? Her words gave shape to the undetectable war presently seething in numerous hearts. To be brutalized would have been less demanding. To be stately by the foe was intolerable. In the midst of this turmoil, little experiences with Americans developed the inconsistencies. One evening, a youthful protect dropped his electric lamp amid roll call. Anna stooped impulses, picked it up, and given it back. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment their eyes met. He gave a calm gesture, nothing more, but the minute waited in her intellect for days. Another time, a trooper passing by the clothing murmured a tune delicate, cadenced, unmistakably American. A young lady from Cologne recognized the tune, snickered, and started murmuring along. For a brief moment, two adversaries shared a tune over an inlet that the war had pronounced unbridgeable. Not all watches were neighborly. A few looked at the ladies with open despise, their looks sharp with despondency for brothers misplaced in Europe. However, indeed, their antagonistic vibe seldom spilled into activity. The ladies were not free, but not one or the other were they brutalized. They existed in a liminal state, suspended between discipline and respite. It cleared out them fretful, uneasy, unable to grapple themselves within the certainty of contempt. And after that came the day they were taken exterior to wire for work detail in adjacent towns. The ladies rode in trucks through American lanes, their eyes wide at shops showing products in full windows, children chasing loops down sidewalks, men perusing daily papers on patios untouched by bombs. They noticed the sweetness of pastry shops, saw lines of cars glimmering in daylight, observed motion picture blurbs put on brick dividers. To ladies whose final recollections of Germany were cratered lanes and charred ruins, the vision was overpowering. America was not as it were intaglio. It was thriving. That night, back in camp, the garrison huts buzzed with whispers. Did you see the cars? The bread? It was white, the houses untouched. For a few, the stun of America's wealth was inebriating. For others, it was terrible confirmation of Germany's collapse. The Reich that had guaranteed them realm had cleared out as it were ruins. The foe had conveyed the world a bounty. It was a truth as well huge to swallow, as well sharp to disregard. The strife, once outside, presently turned internal. In their hearts, devotion combat with reality, pride with appreciation, contempt with hesitant reverence. It was not a clash of armed forces, but a moderate disintegration of conviction. Each bar of chocolate, each hot shower, each sea of an unbroken American road chipped absent at the post of purposeful publicity. The women began to realize that the Reich had not, as it were, lied. It had stolen their vision of the world itself. As the crickets sang exterior the wire and the camp lights gleamed like pale moons, Anna lay wakeful gazing at the rafters. She thought of her family in Munich, of her mother bubbling weeds for dinner, of the rubble where her office once stood. She thought, too, of the American watch's gesture, the chocolate dissolving on her tongue, the clean water gushing down her back. Between these pictures, extended in pit, she may not, however, cross. But in her heart she knew that something inside her was moving, something irreversible. And as another day broke over the camp, plating the spiked wire in gold. The ladies understood that survival was not the as-it-were dress. The genuine challenge lay in standing up to what their imprisonment uncovered around the adversary, approximately their country, and almost themselves. Harvest time leaves drifted over the camp yard, fresh and brilliant within the breeze. The season had turned, in spite of the fact that time interior the wire felt abnormally liquid. Its entry checked less by calendars than by the beat of suppers, work, and letters from domestic. However, underneath the schedule, something significant had taken root. For months the women had lived with the shock of survival in America, their days filled with soap, bread, and baffling civility. But now came the harder reckoning, what all this meant for who they had been and who they might become. Anna sat on the barrack steps one evening, diary balanced on her knees. She wrote by the fading light, her words sharper than before, as though she could no longer contain the conflict churning within. I have eaten more in captivity than in all the winters of the Reich. I have slept without fear of bombs, and yet my heart is not at peace. What kind of world is it where the enemy shows more dignity than our own? Her handwriting trembled. She paused, hearing laughter from a nearby group of women. They were trading pieces of candy, teasing one another about lipstick shades, voices bright as though the war had never touched them. Anna envied them, but she could not join them. Her loyalty to her broken homeland weighed too heavily, even as it slipped through her fingers. The Americans, for their part, grew accustomed to their unlikely prisoners. Some guards stopped seeing them as symbols of an enemy regime and began to recognize them as individuals, frail, stubborn, bewildered, sometimes even charming in their awkward English attempts. A few guards shared cigarettes, passing them silently across the wire, a gesture more human than political. But for every act of quiet kindness, there remained a distance. These were still the enemy, still prisoners, still reminders of lives lost overseas. The camp was never free of tension, only softened by routine. It was outside the wire, however, that the greatest revelations came. More frequently now, women were sent into American town for labor under escort, but with more freedom than they had imagined possible. They picked cotton in fields, worked in canneries, or tidied municipal parks. Townsfolk watched them with curiosity. Sometimes cold, sometimes warm, sometimes indifferent. Children gawked openly, pointing at the German girls, while shopkeepers peered from doorways. Yet what struck the women most was not hostility, but normally. American life flowed unbroken. Cinemas lit their mares. Grocery stores displayed overflowing shelves. Radios blared jazz and baseball scores. For women from cities where rubble had replaced boulevards, the sight was almost unbearable. One day, after hours of harvesting, Anna's group was given lunch in a church hall by local volunteers. The tables groaned with sandwiches, fruit, pies. The women hesitated, hands hovering as if afraid the food might vanish. An elderly American woman, flour dusted her apron, urged them gently, "Eat, eat." Anna bit into an apple, crisp and sweet, and nearly wept. She had not tasted fruit since 1942. Across the table, another prisoner whispered, "This is paradise." But Anna only stared at the apple's white flesh, hearing her mother's voice in memory, "Save the peel for soup." The contrast nearly broke her. At night, back in the barracks, conversations grew heavier. They spoke of home, of families surviving in cellars, of children barefoot in the snow, of brothers lost at the Eastern Front. Some began to admit aloud what had long been unspeakable, that perhaps their nation had lied to them, had sacrificed them not for glory, but for destruction. "We were taught they were beasts," murmured one woman, staring into her blanket. But who are the beasts now? Those who bombed our homes, or those who built this world of plenty? No one answered. Silence carried more weight than words. Yet guilt was not the only burden. Gratitude, too, unsettled them. They were prisoners, but they were alive, clean, fed. They had expected to be stripped of dignity. Yet they had been given more than they dared imagine. The soap, the showers, the chocolate, all were tokens of something larger, something harder to name. Was it mercy? Was it hypocrisy? Or was it simply that the Americans lived by rules the Reich had long abandoned? Each woman wrestled with the questions alone, unable to resolve them, but unable to turn away. Anna's diary grew into a confession of this turmoil. It would be easier to hate. Hatred is a fortress. It keeps the world out. But what they give us, bread, soap, music, it slips past the walls. It demands we see them as human. And if they are human, then what becomes of all the blood, all the ruins, all the lies we swallowed? She closed the book one evening, unable to write more. Her chest tight with something like betrayal. The guards, too, sense a shift. They watched their prisoners laugh at American films shown in makeshift camp cinemas, saw them sing along clumsily but earnestly to songs on the radio. It was disarming, unsettling. One sergeant remarked to another, "You'd forget for a minute they were the enemy if you didn't look at the uniforms." The comment carried a warning as much as wonder, or had demanded clear lines. Life blurred them. The greatest shock, however, lay not in food or work or glimpses of American streets, but in the mirror. The women's bodies changed. Their faces filled out. Hair regained its luster. Color returned to cheek. Some even looked younger, as though captivity had peeled away years of war. To see themselves restored in this way was almost unbearable. It forced them to recognize how deeply the Reich had failed them. The enemy had made them healthy. Their own nation had made them starve. It was not just a revelation, but an indictment. And yet, even as they adjusted, even as laughter returned, an unease hung over everything, for they knew captivity could not last forever. One day they would be sent home to Germany, to rubble, to families waiting in despair. The thought of leaving abundance for hunger again, of trading soap for soot, filled them with dread. More than one whispered at night, "I am afraid to go back." It was treasonous to admit, but true. As winter neared, rumors spread of impending transfers, of repatriation, of journeys eastward. The whispers filled the barracks with unease. What awaited them in the ruins of their homeland? Would their families even recognize them, well-fed, clean, cheeks glowing with the health of captivity? Some dreaded the judgment in their mothers' eyes, the silent accusation that they had lived well while others starved. Anna, staring once more at her diary, wrote the words she had never dared before. "I fear leaving more than I feared arriving." The confession chilled her, but it was honest, for the enemy's greatest weapon had not been guns or bombs. It had been soap, food, and dignity, and those things had done what hatred could not. They had changed her. One morning, as frost laced the camp fences, the announcement came. A transport would depart soon. The women crowded together, hearts pounding, eyes wide with questions they could not voice. To return meant facing hunger, ruins, and the ghosts of all they believed. To stay meant captivity, but also life. The guards read the names from a list, their voices flat. But to the women, every syllable landed like a thunderclap. As Anna heard her name called, as she stepped forward into the cold morning light, she realized the true conflict was no longer between nations. It was inside her in the space where hatred had once lived and where something new, fragile, dangerous, undeniable had begun to.